Welcome to the Unknown Broadcast, and as always, I have to remind you that I am so conservative that I have trouble turning left even when I'm driving. This is broadcast number 13, and our guest tonight is a friend, Pablo Herrera, who is currently serving as a youth pastor of Spring Valley Presbyterian Church, and we're talking about youth discipleship, the role of the family and the church. My name is Don Vino, and I'm president of Midwest Christian Outreach, Inc. in Wonder Lake, Illinois, which produces the Unknown Webcast, and the senior researcher is Ron Hensel, who will introduce you to the sponsors of tonight's webcast. And here's Ronnie.
Here's Ronnie, yes. Welcome, or greetings from beautiful, sunny, hot, and humid Florida. Tonight's broadcast of the Unknown Webcast is brought to you by our friends at World's End Theology Outlet, your one-stop destination for dubious doctrines, half-baked heresies, and other notions whose time has gone. World's End Theology Outlet, and it's also brought to you by our good friends at the Coexist Boutique. While at little petty disagreements over ultimate reality, the nature of truth, and the meaning of life keep you from picking out the perfect gift, we have Mother's Day specials coming up this week at the Coexist Boutique. And now back to you, Don.
Okay, and tonight, as I said, we have Pablo Herrera. Our topic is youth discipleship, the role of the family and the church. And I've known Pablo now, 2 decades, I guess.
Yeah, it's over 20 years.
Yeah, back when you were but a youth, an impressionable youth.
Yes, I was.
And now, as we were mentioning off air, now you have gone over to the dark side and become a Presbyterian. But
yeah, I know.
We're still waiting for you over here, Don.
Yeah, I'm not predestined to be a Presbyterian.
We're experiencing the beatific vision already, and we're just
come to Geneva, Don. Come to Geneva.
Okay, Pablo, why don't you take a few minutes just to kind of let people know how we met and give them a little background on who you are and how we met.
Absolutely. So I met Don back in 1994. 1994, I was 19 years old. I was working for a company, a finance company, and I was working the second shift. So I worked from 11 to 7 o'clock, and during our lunch dinner hour, there was a lady there that was reading her Bible. So I used to go and read my Bible during my lunch hour, and a couple times I would see this lady sitting across a couple tables away from me reading her own Bible. And so I saw her, so I figured I'd strike up a conversation and say, hey, we got another Christian here. Maybe it'd be good for us to talk and just see where she's at in her spiritual walk and that sort of thing. At the time, I didn't know a whole lot about my faith. I just knew I believed in Jesus. I trusted him as Savior, and so I was growing in my faith at the time. And so when I started talking to her, we started just talking about Jesus and all that sort of thing. What I came to find out, not too long into the conversation, is that she was a Jehovah's Witness. And I had no idea what Jehovah's Witnesses believed. I had no idea that they were a cult or anything like that. I just knew that everything she was telling me at the time seemed a little wrong. And so, after a few times we were talking, I really didn't know what to say. She would throw all these things at me like Jesus isn't God, the Trinity is not true, it was a made-up thing, the resurrection really wasn't a physical resurrection, it was more of a spiritual resurrection. Jesus was annihilated and then recreated by Jehovah, and I thought, something's just not right here. And so I was sitting at home, and they used to put out these, do you remember those, I think they were called Shepherd's Guides? It was like the Christian, the Christian version of the Yellow Pages is what they were. And I was thumbing through that thing, and I think at the time, Don, you were still Mount Carmel.
Different than yellow journalism, right?
Yeah, exactly. I think you were called Mount Carmel at the time. It was before MCO, and I saw the ad in there, and it said, "Cults got you down? Give us a call." And so it had all of these Jehovah's Witness, Mormons, and so I called you, and I said, "I need help," and the rest is history. And I remember I came to your house, and you gave me my first apologetics book. which is, I think, the one you give to everybody who comes into apologetics, is Norm Geisler's When Skeptics Ask. So the rest, as you say, is history.
Yeah.
That's back when we had that theme song, right, Don? If there's something heretical in your neighborhood, who are you going to call?
Yeah, exactly. There's something weird in your neighborhood. Who are you going to call? Cult Busters. Yeah, we have had fun with that. In fact, our Defend the Faith guy, which is if you go on our Midwest Christian Outreach Inc. YouTube channel, we are in the process of uploading our radio programs from that era. And we had a guy that we had created, our Defend the Faith guy, big muscular Hercules-looking guy, long flowing hair. And so that is the picture you see on our radio broadcast, so you can tell the difference between those and our webcasts like this. So we had that going on, and we had the Shepherd's Guide. Now, question, you grew up in the church, didn't you?
No, I didn't, actually. I grew up kind of a Creaster Catholic, and it was, very nominal. My parents, immigrants from Mexico and Ecuador, and so they raised me believing in God and all that sort of thing. Went to CCD when I was a kid. Went to Mass, on the high holy days.
For the non-initiated, what is CCD?
Oh, that was a catechism class.
It stands for Confraternity of Christian Doctrine. That's what the CCD stands for. Yeah, I took those too.
Oh yeah. There you go. And so you do that when you're a little kid and you start learning about the Roman Catholic faith and that sort of thing. And so it wasn't until 8th grade, when I was in detention, actually, in school, when my teacher, who was a Christian, took a big risk and actually shared the gospel with me, and I came to Christ in 1988. So it was in 8th grade.
Oh, cool. Oh, cool. I guess I didn't know that before.
Yeah.
CCD. Now, in light of where we're going to be going with this tonight, I want to ask a question. As a non-Presbyterian, Presbyterians have a sort of a form of CCD, do they not?
Well, somewhat. We have the Westminster Shorter Catechism, and so a lot of times we use that with kids, and I use it with my kids, and a lot of times different Presbyterian churches do confirmation. It all depends on which church you're at. Some do, some don't. But before you go into receiving the Lord's Supper, the kids usually go through the catechism in some way, and that's just, if anybody knows what that is, it's just question and answer stuff, which is just theology.
Are you in the PCA, Pablo?
I am, sir.
I don't know of any PCA churches that practice confirmation.
No, mine doesn't.
Oh, okay. Maybe some PCUSA churches.
I think the PCUSA does still, but I know we don't.
Okay.
But you spent time going through that. I ask that for a reason. In kind of the more Baptistic traditions, although they have Sunday school,
right?
They tend to look at Bible stories. They don't tend to teach why we believe certain doctrines.
Right.
I'm not saying that they don't believe them. They have a statement of faith, but it sort of is assumed, and this is a thing I see in a lot of churches, and I'm not sure really how to address it other than just to say it's a problem and needs to be addressed, which is that someone who grows up in the church, it is assumed that since they affirm the doctrinal statement, they understand it. When someone comes to the church later in life and wants to join, they are given a doctrinal statement that they must, again, affirm, sign off to before they can become a member. And because they've always attended a certain kind of a church, they acknowledge, yes, this is what the church believes, but they don't really necessarily understand it. In the Presbyterian tradition, do you have a way with the youth where you're teaching them, this is what we believe and this is why we believe it, or do you just ask them a series of questions that they assent to?
Yeah, so a couple things. Let me just back up a bit. So when in our denomination particularly, before a child comes to take communion, right, there is certain things that they need to hold to, they need to believe. And so part of that is, as their parents think that they're ready to come to take the Lord's table, take from the Lord's table, they will meet with the elders, and we will ask them a series of questions. And usually is, who is Jesus? Do you believe you're a sinner? What are you trusting in to get to heaven? Basically, so they have an understanding that they're justified by faith alone, and that their trust is in Jesus Christ and Him and His work on the cross, and nothing else. And so sometimes kids could be, 7, 8, 9 years old. Some of them are older. It all depends. But those are some of the things that we ask them right off the bat, because to take the Lord's table, we just need to make sure that you're trusting in Jesus, that you're a believer, that your faith is in Christ alone. As we progress, as they get older, and they start coming into Sunday school classes, and then eventually getting into my youth group, some of the things that we talk about is doctrine. We start learning about the deity of Christ. We start learning about theology proper. We start, that stuff may sound a little bit dry, but they enjoy it. And so we start learning those things. Who is Jesus? The sufficiency of Scripture, the inerrancy of Scripture. All of these things they start to learn and develop. And so it's their progress throughout. Once they get into the junior high stage, at least formally with me, that's what they're starting to learn: apologetics, theology, that sort of thing.
Right, and that's really important. I have, as Pablo knows, and Ron may have some recollection of this, I'm not sure. Some years ago, we had experimented with doing like Young Defenders Boot Camp.
I remember that.
Apologetics for youth. Well, you remember because you were intimately involved.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And in part, that we started working on that. We didn't quite finish it because we had difficulty getting it funded, frankly.
Yeah.
Was in part because of two things that I had observed over time. One is that many of the youth that were growing up in the church were leaving the church about the time they went to college, because we just had no real answers to serious questions.
Yeah.
And the second thing is, as we were meeting with Wiccans, a fair amount of the Wiccans that I met with had grown up in evangelical churches.
Right.
Questioned their faith, didn't get really credible answers. And they wanted to be spiritual, but Christianity seemed like just a dry old book that had no real evidence or reasoning behind it, other than my pastor believes it, my family believes it. And as you know, my two kids grew up in an apologetically kind of
infused.
Yeah, observant home. Apologetically observant home.
Yeah.
And so for us, around the dinner table, we prayed together as a family. We brought up the daily issues every day. We made sure we had dinner every day together.
Right.
Talk about the school issues. Talk about what's going on. And we talked about what was going on in the world. And when something would come on television, we talked to the TV. We talked to the radio. And sometimes my son would get so exasperated when he was about 8 or 9 years old, and a commercial came on, and Joy kind of started on one of her rants, and he goes, "Oh, Mom, you're always trying to get to the point of everything." Well, and they grew up, though, knowing how to argue and reason and ask questions. Ron, sorry about that.
That explains those psychological tests that you got from the DCF, right?
Yeah.
Talking to the TV.
And you bring up an interesting point down here. Is a lot of times what happens is we read all those studies out there. We've read Barna, we read other people who say that once the youth get into college, they leave their faith. Some ridiculous kind of percentage, 70-75% of kids leave the faith. But actually, what's interesting is that there was a study done by Brett Beamer and Ken Ham, is that there's actually kids that are already checked out. They're already gone in 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. Mm-hmm. They're already checked out. They're physically in the church. I mean, they're coming to church with their parents because at that time they're not driving, they don't have jobs, so their parents make them go to church, which I think is good. They should make them go to church. The issue is their brain's already checked out. They're already not believing it.
Yeah, I was for several years, I taught middle school Bible, and in a Christian school, obviously. And I could tell, you could just tell from the look in their eyes sometimes, but also you get into conversations with them. They're kind of cautious because they've been, in a Christian school especially, they've been trained to respect the teacher. Mm-hmm. But those are the ages, 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, when they're really starting to question, and some of them are not coming to the answers that their parents would have liked them to come.
Oh, no doubt.
So,
But I think what
yeah.
happens is they're not being asked the question. So a lot of times parents are saying, well, they're not asking the questions. Well, they're probably not answering the questions because maybe they don't feel that they can ask a question. And so one of the things that I like to tell parents is you need to create those questions for you. You need to create the conversation. Much like you did, Don, when when you were parenting your kids when they were little. You bring it up. And so
Right. Well, for us, it was normal. See, I didn't really think about. I didn't think about it in terms of we need to be training, blah blah blah. Although Joy and I talked about that a lot, and it's kind of funny because when the kids were young, she kept saying, we need to have family altar, blah, all that kind of stuff.
Mhm.
When in actuality, for us, it was just part of our lifestyle. It is it is the air we breathed.
Exactly.
And so, and our kids are very different. Lee, as you know, will argue at the drop of a hat, and he'll drop a hat. Jennifer is far more reticent, and she never could understand our zeal almost to debate issues so much.
Yeah.
Until she hit high school, and she kind of bloomed at that point, and a couple of things happened. In English class, she had to write a defensive paper as part of her English literature.
Yeah.
And so she decided that she was going to write on the topic of slavery, slavery, Nazi Germany, and abortion, that murder is socially acceptable. And so she turned in her proposal, and her teacher said, well, it's an interesting idea, but there's no evidence that abortion is murder, so you can't really write this paper.
Mm-hmm.
And Jennifer came home not happy, and so when Jennifer's unhappy, pretty much the rest of us are unhappy as well. So she said, so I want to write a paper on abortion is murder. That was the topic she wanted to do. So we met with a friend of mine, Jim Hoffmeyer, who was teaching at Wheaton College. He's an archaeology professor, great guy. And presented our dilemma, and he said, well, if you decide to write the paper, he said, if it was me, and I had said not to write it, I probably would still accept it, but I would have one of my assistants grade it because I would want to eliminate my bias. He said, but be careful how you write it. Don't make it a biblical treatise. Well, it's a public school. So we took her, and she got the information from the Crisis Pregnancy Center. We had her meet with a doctor. She did a number of things in her research. She came back and she wrote a paper, a compelling case that what's in the human is human, and that killing a human is murder.
Yeah.
And she got an A on the paper. The second thing that happened then is the teacher set up a debate between her and the rest of the class.
Oh my goodness.
And the class picked a young man to represent the pro-abortion side. And Jennifer came home and said, okay, what do I do? I said, well, first, their arguments. So what you do is start out, because you get to go first. Answer all of the things that you think he's going to raise his arguments as to why you reject them, and make a positive case for your position, and then sit down and see what he does. So she did that, and he stood up and he looked around and he says, I don't really have anything else to say.
Yes. That's awesome.
So that kind of enlivened her to the faith, because she had those successes, but she had them because of how she grew up.
Well, yeah, and not only that, though, her faith was taken out of private fear. And so a lot of times what's happened within Christian circles, unfortunately, is we've had this view, the sacred-secular divide, right? And so it's a false view, it's a false dichotomy because, people think, well, the spiritual stuff, that's for Sunday morning, and that's in your private devotions, and that's it. The Bible doesn't speak to the issues of the day. The Bible doesn't speak to areas of education or politics or economics or anything like that, or education. See, that stuff is for outside the church. That's the scriptures don't speak to those things. But you just love Jesus, read your Bible, and that sort of thing. And so, I think that unfortunately, that type of view, what happens is you have this ultra pietism where people only see their Christian view and their faith having to do with their individual salvation and nothing more. But the issue is that the gospel has implications for so many things outside the culture, and so the Bible does speak to these things. And as Christians, we need to be teaching the young people that, look, the Bible isn't just about you being moral. because they can look to any world religion and see morality. The issue is what the Bible claims to be, is it's the final authority. It's the authoritative word from God, the creator of the universe. And so when you have these kids understanding that it applies to all areas of life, then at least they say, you know what, the Bible does talk about this stuff, and it does make sense to me. And I think, like with Jennifer, that's exactly what happened to her. And she saw that her faith also spoke to the issues of the day and not just her own private salvation.
All right, a couple things, and then I want to ask a question of both of you. For those who are viewing, there is a chat feature that you can click into if you want to send questions into us. And we will try to respond to them as we have opportunity. Ron is an elder, right, in your church?
That is correct.
Not an elderly guy, but an elder in the church.
Yeah, very.
Yeah. And Pablo, you're a youth pastor.
Yeah.
So
I'm an elder as well in my church.
Who says, look, pardon?
I'm an elder as well in my church.
You're an elder, but not elderly. Like
exactly. No, I'm getting there though.
Yeah, it happens. I know it's just starting to get white.
All here, right here.
Yeah. As elders and as a youth leader and as someone who taught in school, middle school, what is wrong with the idea that many parents seem to have of, look, we come to church on Sunday morning and we send our kids to youth group. That should be sufficient for you to train them in the faith. Is there anything wrong with that idea? And if so, what is it?
Ryan, go first.
Okay, so you're asking if they, in other words, they can just drop off the kids and we Christianize them, that kind of a thing?
Yeah, sort of. Well, and of course, come on Sunday morning as well.
I think we're kind of fortunate in that regard in terms of we have a high percentage of parents who realize that it's really their job to bring up their children in the nurture and admonition of the Lord. So you're asking, what do we say to them?
No, what is wrong with the idea that... Well, let me back up. I'll tell you a conversation I just had with a pastor about 2 weeks ago on this very issue. He had me into his church because he wanted his people to understand where culture's at, that the church is now not the predominant spiritual institution in this nation, and is in fact under assault because his people, like many church people, live in a sort of a Christian ghetto. They're not really as aware of what's going on out there, number one. Number two, they tend to think, look, I come on Sunday morning, my kids come to youth group, that should be sufficient. And his comment was, I have my people to teach maybe 40 minutes on a Sunday. The youth pastor has them for maybe an hour, part of which is used in activities to kind of get their energies out of there so they can pay attention. So if I'm really, really, really lucky, I have them for 2 hours a week, usually less. Culture has them for the 166 hours a week. So is the idea of a parent that, look, I drop them off for the hour a week, you should be able to tell them everything they need to know, whether that is stated or just implicit. What is wrong with that idea?
Well, I would use the same if I were if I were talking to the parent and I was trying to explain it to them. I would use the same analogy that I used when I was trying to explain to Mrs. Diedelhofer why her 8th grade son was failing out of all the classes I taught, and a lot of times that was because she wasn't making sure he did his homework.
Uh-huh.
I had a general rule. I called it my 80-20 principle. 80% of boys and 20% of girls need someone to stand over them at night, usually with some kind of automatic weapon, and make sure that their children did the homework. And I would have parents saying things like, I'm not going to do that. And I go, well, then your son is going to fail. And sure enough, it was, if I ever had a parent like that, and it came to grade time, yeah, their kid was usually failing, almost always, if they had that, that kind of a child. And it's the same with the truths of the faith. It's this, in Deuteronomy, believe it's chapter 6.
Yes, sir.
They're commanded, we are commanded as parents to go over these things while we're walking in the way, while we're sitting down, while we're standing up. We are to, I don't think that literally means every minute of the day, but it means
All the
in
time.
all kinds of circumstances. Yeah. Well, if it was true under the Mosaic law, how much more is it true today that our children need to know that the faith is something that we should be able to talk about in front of the television set, in the car. It's not just something limited to a certain time frame, and it's not something to be delegated. It's not to be delegated to other people. It was the parents' role. They had priests, they had prophets, they had teachers, they had rabbis.
Yes.
It was the parents' role.
Amen, Ron. And that's so true. And I just want to add a couple things to that, Don, too. Amen to that, Ron. But also, one of the things that what I think the church has done, especially in maybe the 80s and 90s, when this whole youth ministry thing just exploded, is what the message that was being communicated from the church to the parents was, we're professionals, don't try this at home. And so it's exactly what they were saying, is like, look, and so by default, parents would just assume, well, wait a minute, then I need to just leave my kid here, and they got it. Why do I need to be diligent or to impress upon, as Deuteronomy 6 says, these truths? Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one, right? And so a proper view of God was to be taught to the children by the parents first and foremost. It is the primary responsibility of the parent to disciple the kids, but because of what I think a lot of churches have done, unfortunately, is that they've said, look, like I said, we're professionals here. We got the youth guy here. He's got the mousse in his hair. He's got the goatee. He's got
the soul patch.
Yeah, he's got a soul patch. He's got the skinny jeans on, and he's got the flannel tight shirt, and he looks like a hipster, right? So he's good. He's going to connect with your kids, right? They're only a couple years older than him. For me, it's kind of weird for me to be a youth guy because I'm 40. I'm going to be 41 this year.
Was it Reverend Tom Tom on the middle? Could relate to the kids with his guitar. I don't know if you ever saw that guy.
No, never seen that.
Okay.
but that's exactly it, Don. I think with the parent, unfortunately, I think has lost. A lot of the parents have lost that understanding, or because the church has not been intentional about equipping parents and saying, look, parents, we're here to help you. We're here to come alongside you. We're here to equip you to disciple and train the next generation. We have to have a multi-generational vision, all right? Not just me and my kids, but looking generations down the road is where we're seeing our grandchildren's grandchildren coming to know Jesus. And so that's the kind of attitude we need to have. And so not only in the Old Testament, Ron, Deuteronomy 6, but Ephesians 5, we see Ephesians 6, I'm sorry, we see Paul's admonition to fathers to train their children in the fear and admonition of the Lord. So not only in the Old Testament, but in the New Testament, we see the very same thing.
Steve Brown was one of my favorite authors. He told a story about a youth minister who walked in late to an elders meeting, and the youth minister said, sorry I'm late, but we got involved in this discussion at the youth meeting, and it just kind of got carried away. But would you believe that these kids, some of these kids actually believed that Jesus Christ was God come in the flesh? Can you believe that?
Oh my goodness!
They actually believe that that there was something called the incarnation, and there was this silence that came over the elders. It turns out that this guy was kind of a joker. Well, anyways. Finally, some of the elders started opening up and said, well, kids will do that. This is that time of life when it's okay for them to make mistakes without many consequences and so on. They were saying things like this, and finally the youth pastor got up and says, and they go, where are you going? He says, I'm getting out of here. I'm going to go find some elders who really know theology. He was trying to make a point, which was that the adults have to have their act together, maybe some of the reasons why parents and even some leaders don't take a more active role is because they don't have their biblical act together. They're just as much in need of feeding. So I think it's incumbent upon the church leaders to notify parents that they are to be taking their kids through the scriptures. I'm not saying you have to subscribe to one particular method, but you should be engaging your children on the topics of the important topics of the Bible: sin, salvation, the Christian life, and then hopefully parents, if they realize that they're not very equipped in this, they will seek it. They will seek it out from the leaders of their church. You make a good point, Pastor, but man, I don't know how to do this. Can you help me? I think pastors would be.
That's a really important thing, because even as you're talking about this, I had a discussion earlier today with a pastor who is concerned about discipleship, and he's trying to create some way for his people to disciple other people, and I spent a lot of time talking about a program mentality versus a lifestyle. And not everyone's going to do things exactly the same way. I mean, I raised my kids a certain way. I interacted with Pablo in a particular way because I tend to like to walk with somebody for the long term and live out the faith, and as questions arise, deal with them, or sometimes push the questions so that they can have to deal with them while I'm available to keep them during the crisis from losing their minds.
Yes.
Right? Yeah. Which is really a big part of discipleship, because if you're going to do it well, you're going to have to push people to crisis mode. And clearly that's not for everybody. My concern with him, and I express this, is you want to stop short of creating another program, because humans like neatness. We like steps. That's why Bill Gothard, who you mentioned earlier, Ron, was so effective, because he gives you steps and rules and principles, and if you follow all 239 of whatever steps, rules, and principles he gives you, out will pop little Johnny, spiritual Johnny.
Right. And that's why, and that also is like the automatic explanation for failure is you mustn't have done all the steps.
Right, you missed a step somewhere along the way. And speaking of that, Ron, do we have anything from our sponsors tonight on that might be helpful?
Well, now that you mention it, Don, we actually do. You remember our good friends at World's End Theology Outlet, your one-stop destination for dubious doctrines, half-baked heresies, and other notions whose time is gone. Well, they want you to ask some questions of what's going on in your church. For example, are the youth in your church asking too many questions? Do they listen to music that leads to potential sins like foot tapping, for example? Do they start yawning as soon as you bring up the evils of Hollywood? Well, this week on clearance, we're trying to sell these. We've got plenty of them, and this is probably the reason why churches are in such trouble, is because they have not availed themselves of Bill Gothard's umbrella of protection. This covers just about everything you could want. Umbrella of authority, which will protect your kids from things like foot tapping and other notorious things. Bill Gothard's Umbrella of Protection is an amazing product. You need them in your church. You should have many of them. All it costs this week is your Christian freedom. This offer is not available in Scripture, and it's only available at World's End Theology Outlet. Back to you, Don.
Why, a truer word was never spoken. All it costs is your Christian freedom. And it gives you tremendous guilt, because as a parent, if you follow all the steps, rules, and principles in whatever program you have subscribed to, and little Johnny or Janie becomes a Wiccan, then obviously you missed a step, a principle, a something somewhere along the way, and so it's your fault. Or if you happen to be, say, the wife in the situation, and this has happened, it's because your husband, who is your umbrella of protection, is a leaky umbrella, and it was your job to fix the leak without usurping his authority at the same time. I don't really quite
man.
So I want to be a little careful, because I could wander off into a whole...
No, No bondage there. No bondage.
Nothing.
Yeah, no bondage there. I could wander off on the whole thing about that, but coming back to this, what role does the church play in helping families to disciple their children? Disciple, I think, being the key word. By the way, I saw a film last night. It was a one-time showing. I think it'll come out in a broader release later, called The Climate Hustle. And the first thing I thought of was my 14-year-old grandson, Nathan, who's also interested in these things. I mean, he's in a very good church. They actually teach apologetics in his youth group.
Oh my goodness.
And it's the Orchard in McHenry. They do a really good job.
Great church.
And he calls me when he's working on some Bible problem. He doesn't quite know what to do. He calls me and goes, Papa, what would you do with this passage? So we walk through the context. So I call him and I said, I have this opportunity. Would you like to go and see this? He goes, absolutely. Well, and it is part of the faith. And you go, well, wait a minute, it's about climate change. How does that affect it? Well, because climate change is the new competing religion.
Yep.
And they lay that out in the film, actually. They demonstrate why that is the case. And so apologetics, training and discipling in a Christian worldview is not simply, I'm taking away your thunder, not something that happens in church. So how can churches help parents disciple their children?
That's a good question. I think one of the main ways that the church does this is to be faithfully preaching the scriptures, first and foremost, on every Sunday morning. As the pastor gets up and exposits the word, that he preaches it with authority, that he preaches it in its context, that it speaks to us, that it addresses the issues of the day when it needs to, that they not shy away from the hard things. And I think a lot of times pastors can get afraid of that sort of thing. They don't want to touch on certain issues. They want to step back and they don't want to be too controversial. And so the first way that they can help that is to preach the word faithfully every Sunday. So that's the first way. The second way is to have a good functioning elder board, or if you're a deacon-run church or whatever, your leadership ought to be one that is themselves equipped, that they should be in the Word themselves, that they should be studying themselves, that they should be challenging and encouraging themselves, and be active in pursuing those parents and making sure how are they doing in their spiritual life. So, for example, in my church, I'm assigned a certain amount of people in my church to kind of shepherd over, right? So the pastor can't do it all. So the elders, we call it the session, will be ones that we get assigned different people. So I have a group of about, 15 people or so, and I'm constantly checking in with them. How are you doing? How could I be praying for you? And I'm kind of that first line of defense if they have questions. And because I have I'm the youth pastor there, I have parents of youth that I'm talking to. I'm asking them, how are your kids doing? What areas can we be praying for your kids about? And that sort of thing. And so another way is to make sure that your elder or your leadership is making ways to reach out to parents and to asking them, shepherding them, discipling them too, so they understand that they're here for them to help in the raising of their kids, but also to reinforcing, whether it's in Sunday school or youth group or whatever it is that you're doing when you have the kids there, is that you're reinforcing and what the parents should be doing. And if the parents aren't doing that, that you're encouraging them to do that. So I meet with the men's group as well, and so I got about 4 or 5 guys that I meet with, and I'm challenging them all the time. How are you guys doing in your walks with the Lord? How are you doing in your walks? How are you doing with your wife and your children if they have them? Are you discipling them? Are you training them? Are you talking about the things of God with them? And so the church needs to make it. The church has to be a place that's hospitable and open to children. One thing, I kind of get on this bandwagon, and if you disagree with me, my apologies. But I think that churches ought to have kids in the worship service. I know some churches are okay. We're okay with sending their kids to children's church, and I'm not necessarily against children's church, but I'm against any churches that when you come in with kids, they automatically send you to children's church. They say you got to go there. Okay, kids can't be in here; it's too distracting.
Okay, well, then, so it could be optional for the kids as well.
Right, that's what I'm saying. It could be optional, if anything. And so, my church has children's church, and they can go there if they want to. But the church shouldn't be hostile or against having kids in the worship service because of fear that somehow they're going to be a distraction to other people. We look in the scriptures, we see kids present in the worship service. When Paul is addressing in Ephesians 6, he addresses fathers and he says, children, obey your parents in the Lord. Right? So obviously Paul is speaking to children in that passage, assuming that they're in the worship service when this letter is being read. And so he's addressing the kids. And so I think what needs to happen, and one other way that the church helps, is to make it that way so kids can be in the service as well.
You raise an interesting point, because Ron alluded to this earlier. In the Old Testament, God told the Jews to think about these things when you're walking in the way, when you're working, when you're and as you just laid that out, Pablo, in the first century, Paul was Jewish, and he was. I would say, so at least some of his heritage and style were brought into the church. So it is very likely that he was training the early believers to do the same things, as far as here's how you pass on the faith to your kids.
Mm-hmm.
So probably you're right. They probably were available in the main meeting of the body.
Right.
Although I think, like you say, it could be optional. So I think back some years ago, I pastored a church for about a year, and it was interesting. I really had a good time doing it. I was surprised. I actually felt like I did a pretty good job.
Yeah.
But it was unusual because several women had newborn babies, and so they were, going to be off in some room somewhere else, segregated to here. And so, why do we want to do that? Just get some rocking chairs. Let them be in here. They can rock the babies.
Absolutely.
We're surprised.
Yeah.
And there was an attraction to that. New people would come to the church. They would see this, and it felt more like family.
Yes.
I'm not saying all churches can do that. Obviously, we're meeting in a auditorium of a school at the time, so we could furnish it however we wanted to make it work.
Yeah.
And even when I was preaching, I had a lady come in, first-time visitor. Halfway through the sermon, she raised her hand, and everyone kind of looked at her like, "What are you doing?" I stopped and I called on her, and she said, and we were talking about the baptism and salvation, and she said, So you're saying I don't have to be baptized to be saved?" And I said, "Exactly. You are saved by grace alone, through faith alone, in Christ alone. Baptism is something else, but it is not for salvation." And as it turns out, she was Roman Catholic. And so she tied salvation to being baptized. And so we had this conversation. And after, the elders came up to me and they go, "Why would you do that?" I said, "She had a question." Don't people come to church with questions?
Yeah, that's great. That's awesome. And so, I think we need to be open, and the church should also be making sure that any programs that they have, whether it's Sunday school, VBS, that it's very children-friendly, family-friendly, that they're open to that. Again, equipping, looking for young men to train, all that sort of thing. And so the church needs to be open, and that's one of the main way, like I said earlier, is to pastors be faithfully preaching the Word of God every single Sunday morning.
What about, here's an odd question just popped into my brain.
Yes, sir.
When that happens, it rattles around. What would it look like, and is it something that you would recommend, or you would be opposed to? Pardon?
You were kind of breaking up there for a second. I don't know if we're having buffering issues or what.
Physically, or my voice?
Yeah. It's breaking up is hard to do,
Well, for me, it's something I do regularly. To do like a field trip, let's say, with your high school youth, to maybe take them to a Hindu temple and tour the temple and get some input from those leaders there to give you something to talk about, so they can see that up close and personal. Or go to, like up here about an hour and a half away, we have Circle Sanctuary. It's a 200-acre compound, a Wiccan. I think the oldest 501c3 religious Wiccan group in the U.S. is up here about an hour and a half from me.
Okay.
Is that something you would recommend doing with the youth? And if so, why? And if not, why not?
I would say absolutely. I haven't done it yet, but definitely on the radar at some point. But yeah, why not? I mean, if you're exposed, I think first and foremost the job of any youth leader or parent is to educate in their own faith first and foremost. Okay, I think it was Hank Hanegraaff who said that you get so familiar with the truth that when you see a fake, you know it instantaneously. Something like that. I think something like that.
That is a common analogy. It has to do with treasury agents who spend all their time learning about the real money so that they would always recognize a counterfeit, which at one time I think was probably a good analogy. I tend to not like it as much today, and here's why.
Okay.
Counterfeit money has become so sophisticated that sometimes even treasury agents cannot identify.
Yes, that's true. Yes.
The second problem with it is dollar bills cannot talk back to you to tell you why they are real dollar bills.
That's right. You're
False teachers do it all the time, and it becomes confusing.
Yeah.
So,
absolutely. Yeah, but I think, Don, I think that's a great idea. It's a field trip. It's a good way to get exposure to what others are out there believing and what they're saying, and you get to see it up close. You get to hear it from the actual leader. So if you wanted to talk to a guru or a Hindu priest or what have you, you hear it from the horse's mouth. And so why not? Yeah, I'm all for it.
Which is better than the other one, obviously.
Yes.
Of course, you will find adults in the church, very often parents, feel threatened by this kind of a thing. They will wonder if, maybe the real strategy is to cloister my child, protect my child from all this other stuff so that they aren't tempted to go in that direction. Oh, gee, what if they have Hindu friends? What are you going to do if they get invited to a youth meeting over at the Hindu temple? What would you say to those parents?
Well, I'd say, first of all, let's not be too freaked out about that sort of thing. God's sovereign over all that, but it's a good opportunity for you as a parent to step in the gap now, right, and work with the church and say, as you having the kid being secure in their faith as much as possible, but also having that as an opportunity to open real dialogue and saying, so, Johnny, what did you learn today? And when you went to this Hindu temple, it's a great opportunity to not only see how your worldview as a Christian stands against other worldviews and other religious systems, because when you look at it, go ahead, Ron.
How about inviting the parent? When the parent feels threatened, say, you know what?
Why don't you come?
I would like you to come with and sit through the presentation, and then sit through the Bible study that we're going to have afterward about the topic. About what we just saw. Maybe that's another option.
That's actually what I was going to say next, and that's another way.
That's because we're both Presbyterians. That's why I knew what you were going to say.
That's exactly why.
We're both reading from the same script.
But that's a way that the church can help, is that you bring the parents in. Like I said, you want to get out of the mentality of we are professionals, don't try this at home. We want to bring you in. We want to bring the parents in. You want to come? Come. You want to sit in my Bible study? Please do. We're always open. I want to have parents as youth leaders in my youth group. We've had that in the past. But we want to include it. So that's why when we do activities, now I'm kind of like the evil youth pastor, because I don't do a whole lot. I don't do a whole lot of games. I mean, we do them.
So not dodgeball or anything like that?
So once in a while. And seriously, I mean, they're few and far between. We used to, back in the beginning when I took over the youth group, we used to have a fun activity every single Sunday when we meet. But the problem was what was going on is that we would have to cut the Bible study short in order to get to the activity, right. so then we could get the kids home on time. So after a while, I'm like, no, this can't happen. And so we need to make sure that even if it takes us longer to get through the work, we're going to do that, and then we'll schedule our activities, once or twice a month instead. And that's what we've been doing. And so when I tell parents, hey, when there's new parents that come to the church and they're like, well, I have youth, tell me about your youth group, I say, I'm going to be honest with you. I said, I'm not flashy. You're not going to get the pop in circumstance that a Harvest will give you or a Willow Creek will give you. But what I can guarantee you is that we're going to teach your children truth. And we're going to reinforce what you should be doing already. We're always going to point your children to Christ and to your parent and to you. And so that's one thing that I can promise them.
You raised two things pop into my brain as you're talking about this. One is the pop in circumstance. Earlier you alluded to the cool youth pastor with the skinny jeans and the soul patch. And when we did our Young Defenders boot camp, the couple of times we did, I noticed a really intriguing thing is many of the youth were attracted to, say, Marcia Montenegro. She's clearly not.
No.
The skinny jeans,
No.
you know, whatever equivalent to female would be of that. She almost looks like a witch when she dresses, yeah, actually. You know, she was a professional astrologer. She wrote the test, I think, for Atlanta to become a licensed astrologer. And she's a rock-solid believer now, and a graduate of Southern Evangelical Seminary, just a sharp lady.
Very.
Yeah, the youth, it's like little ducklings following her all over the convention site.
I remember that.
And the same thing with Bill Hunsberger, and he's not the most attractive individual you would ever want to meet, clearly not the kind of youth pastor you were talking about, and yet everyone wants to be with him just to pick his brain as they're doing. The second thing I wanted to raise.
I have.
Yeah.
Okay, you go with the second thing, and I have a couple thoughts.
Okay. For a while, for several years, I had a couple of churches that would bring me in, usually early spring, as their high school kids were getting ready to graduate high school and thinking about college, and I would spend a weekend or 2 weekends going through Worldviews. Mm-hmm. Part of the process is after we taught on Worldviews, we would have a movie night.
Yep.
And I usually use the film Hidalgo, which actually has 3 worldviews represented in it. Mm-hmm. And as they watched it, I would say, okay, now every film, every book, every whatever has a worldview. Can you pick out the worldviews here that are being promoted? The worldviews, what are they, and which ones are being promoted as superior? And what you discover is the American Indian worldview is the predominant, prevailing, wisest worldview you have.
It's the Disney worldview. It's the one endorsed by Disney.
Mm-hmm.
Right. But after doing that, then they felt like, okay, when they go to college, they could actually ask questions because they understood how this stuff operates.
Yeah, absolutely.
Ron, you had a couple of things?
Well, when you were talking about Marcia and Bill and how the youth are attracted to them, I would, in my observation, there are, the first thing that I've noticed over the years is that kids are attracted to authenticity in the person. They can smell it. It's like a magnetic force. They can tell a fake from a real one. They're attracted to the flashiness. They'll go with that for a while, but as soon as they spot someone who is real and who is not pretending, not putting it on, I've always seen that it's like magnetic to them. And secondly, it's something I learned in teaching. There's a saying that teachers have, and that is that kids don't care what you know until they know that you care. And I would guess that Bill and Marcia are good at showing kids that they care about them, even though their heads are crammed with all this information. That's not what really I think the kids see. I think they see caring individuals who are a burden for them, that these kids know the truth and can navigate their way through life.
That's a huge component, Ron, too, that those leaders that are actually teaching them and leading them, that they actually know that they care about them. That's huge.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Do we have another word from our sponsors there, Mr. Hensel?
Well, yeah, Don, Mother's Day is coming up. I'm hearing an echo. Are you guys hearing an echo? I don't know why. A little bit. Okay. Well, so, our friends at the Coexist Boutique want to know, does your mother sacrifice baby goats in her backyard? It's just a simple question. Does she have the map of the Scientology universe tattooed on her back?
Oh, my gosh.
Does she wear a Che Guevara t-shirt to her grandchildren's baptisms? Well, these can, believe it or not, these can cause awkward moments in your relationship with your mom, especially if you've got your own kids too. So, we just want you to know that you can find the perfect Mother's Day gift for mothers of every ideology at the Coexist Boutique. No need for an argument, no need for a big, long discussion, no need to make that domestic disturbance phone call that usually comes up at this time of year. At the Coexist Boutique, you can show that you care enough to take your hands off your loved ones' throats long enough to pick out the perfect gift. The Coexist Boutique is open 24/7 online. All right, thank you.
You guys are a riot.
That's
I love it.
that we're trying not to let people catch on to that, but okay. Don, I'm not hearing you at all. I can't hear you at all. Pablo, can you say something?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Okay, how's this? Can you hear me
There
now?
we go. Yes, sir.
Suddenly, you are back.
I got my Verizon switch here. Can you hear me now?
Yep.
I hear you.
Pablo, what is moralistic therapeutic deism, and why should we care?
Moralistic therapeutic deism is a term that was coined by Christian Smith. Christian Smith is a sociologist. Back when he coined that term, he was at the University of Notre Dame, and he wrote a book called Soul Searching: The Religious and Spiritual Lives of American Teenagers. And the study that he did was called the National Study for Youth in Religion. And he did this whole study about American teenagers and what they believed about God. And so he talked to Catholic teens, Protestant teens, he even went to Mormon teens and Jewish teens and different ones that are religious. And what he came up with is that out of all these teenagers, even within evangelicalism, have this view of God that he coins moralistic therapeutic deism. And pretty much what that means is that God is a cosmic butler, that he's there to make me happy, that he is there to give me all I want and all I need. He doesn't really require much of me, so he just, he's there when I need him. And so if I'm having a hard time, I can call on God and maybe he can help me. And he really just wants me to be nice to people, right? In this view, right, it's about making them feel right. And it's deism because the God isn't really there, in a sense that he's not immanent. There is no satisfaction of sin. There's no propitiation. There's none of that stuff. There's no wrath. All it is this deistic view of God that is kind of out there, kind of created me and just kind of lets me do my own thing. And if I need him, I can call on him and he comes to me. But then when everything is good, then he goes away. And so that's pretty much in a nutshell. Now he's a lot more sophisticated in how he explains it, but in a nutshell, that's what it is. God's a cosmic butler to make me happy. And the problem with, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I think about this a lot. The problem with calling it deism is that a true deism doesn't allow for answered prayer, and it's kind of hard to see how God could be a butler doing anything for you if you have the true historic deism. God is not only not immanent in deism, but he is not even he's not even attentive. He doesn't concern himself directly with the world. But anyways, go ahead.
Well, yeah, but see you're right, Ron. Deism in its true form is that. But I think what they've done is they've Christianized it some, and so there's still some aspects of Christianity that they bring into it. So the prayer, answering of prayer, and that sort of thing. So again, this is what I think Don coined back in the day: designer faith. You kind of pull different things from different, religions' views, and you make them your own.
It's an eclectic faith, right?
Exactly.
You take bits and parcels from different things, and you combine it and come up with something new and innovative that meets your needs. It meets my needs.
Right.
By the way, we have a question from Scott that
good.
They're wondering, do you have a good resource that will help parents disciple their children?
I do. I think one good thing, some books are great, of course, besides the Bible. If you are, catechisms are good. I know people get scared with that word, but the Westminster Shorter Catechism is great because it's a lot of question and answers and good theology, that sort of thing. But some books that are really helpful that I have found really good is one of them is called Ever Loving Truth by Vodi Bakum. That is a very good book that kind of deals with cultural apologetics, and it's geared towards younger people. There's another one called Get Out of My Face. This is one that's geared more towards teenagers, more high school and even junior high school too. But it's really how to counsel and address the issues that they're dealing with through the Proverbs. So that's a very good book. Family-Driven Faith is another good one by Voddie Baucham. It kind of gives you a comprehensive worldview of what the family ought to be doing in the area of discipleship with their kids.
Well,
So some good.
I have a question just for a point of clarification, because Voddie was very involved, of course, with Vision Forum, Doug Phillips, and with Bill Gothard. And so
You want to clarify that, right?
I definitely want to clarify
Yes.
that, because we have, as you know, we've spoken
Yep.
loudly and longly on some
Yes.
of the legalisms and issues that have come from that
Yep.
particular camp. Not to say they're not Christians. We've never said that.
Right.
But the legalisms that seem to
Come out of that.
camp are difficult for me.
Yeah, and of course, obviously, we know what happened with Doug Phillips and all that. But I think Voddie has come a long way away from that whole scene, and I don't think he's involved with a lot of that stuff anymore. However, some of the stuff that he does right is very good, and so I think we could be discerning in that way, especially with Ever Loving Truth. Very, very good book. But I can see why we should clarify that. I'm not saying we endorse all of the stuff that maybe he spoke at with some of the Vision Forum stuff back in the day. But certainly, Ever Loving Truth is just a very general apologetics book that's very helpful.
Good. Okay. Good word. Well, we kind of have rounded the corner here, and obviously it's something we can pick up on again. For those who are viewing this before May 13 and 14, Pablo is one of the workshop presenters at our conference that we put on with Evangelical Ministries to New Religions. It'll be in Palatine, Illinois. Obviously, you can contact us for information or go to the website EMNR, Evangelical Ministries to New Religions, emnr.org, and sign up. It's going to be a great conference. Norm Geisler is going to be there. Marcia Montenegro, Jay Hess, a former writer for the Watchtower, is doing a presentation. We also have things that we're dealing with on transgenderism. We've got a tract we're working with on that, in part because I'm going to take an extra few seconds here, Ron.
Go ahead.
For those who are unaware, a lot of this males can use females' bathroom, showers, etc. started in Palatine, Illinois.
Yep.
The Department of Education threatened the high school there, that if they did not allow the young man who wanted to use the girls' shower facilities, that they were going to withdraw all federal funding. And so the school folded and allowed that. Well, subsequent to that, schools really across the nation are changing their policies before the Department of Education goes to them, because they don't want to jeopardize their funding. And I just got word today that a lawsuit is being filed against the school district on behalf of the parents in that district. So we'll have to see how that works itself out. So this is kind of the heart of the battle, and the Christian worldview must come into the public square. It is, but it needs to be done without having to appeal to the Bible. Because the courts are not going to, look at the Bible as a legal instrument for your argumentations. You're going to have to use really a Christian worldview without having to cite a chapter and verse to do it. How many parents can do that?
And what really bothers me about this is that for years I have self-identified as a millionaire. I consider myself a trans-financed person, and I really don't think that the rights of the trans-financed are being taken into account here. I think we need legislation to, so that when I walk into a bank, I am treated like the person I feel that I am, which, frankly, right now, I feel that my net worth is about $10 million. But anyways,
that explains why you're wearing pajamas all day long, because that's how
You want to send some this way there, Ron?
Right? Say that again, Pablo?
So why don't you send some of that my way?
Well, I'm trying to get the government to recognize it, because when the laws are passed, I will be able to do that by having the money put in my account. I think I should be. treated the way.
Okay, so how does this fit into a program on discipling the youth and the role of the family? I'll tell you what my opinion is, and you all can weigh in on this. If we don't train our youth while we have them, pardon the expression, under authority, where we can kind of protect them and guide them, give them the opportunity to make mistakes without being destroyed as a result of it, like going to a Hindu temple. We can take them, because they're going to end up knowing Hindus at some point and realize they're really nice people, because they are really nice people.
They are.
But then they won't be equipped to see what the issues are. It has nothing to do with niceness. It has to do with truth.
Yes.
And absolutes. So this kind of an issue they are ill prepared for, which is why we're finding millennials and younger are open to embracing homosexuality as just another normal outworking of the sexual life of an individual. That needs to be challenged at a church and a family level in a way that they can assimilate the views and be able to talk about the views in a caring way to people that are not in the church. Does that make sense?
It does. And I think with that, on kind of, tailing on that, Don, is your kids are going to be discipled no matter what. Whether you disciple them in the faith or the culture disciples them in their faith. Because, education is, whatever it is not neutral. There's always a worldview as a foundation. There's always a religious point of view, and so whether or not you're discipling them at home, they're going to get discipled somewhere. So the question is are you going to disciple them, or are you going to let the culture disciple them? And so that's the question we need to answer.
Okay. Ron, as always, it's been fun. Thank you for working with our sponsors. Pablo, we're going to do something along these lines again in the future, I think. I just don't know when.
Oh, yeah, it'd be fun. This was great, guys.
Thank you, Pablo.
Thanks for having me.
We really enjoyed
awesome.
having. Hey, if you didn't come, we wouldn't have a show probably. Don and I talking is something we haven't figured out how to make interesting yet, but we might end up doing that someday.
we may, but we'll revisit. We'll come back and do something on this again in the future, or something else, and I think it'll be interesting. But
that sounds good.
Thank you, Pablo.
And, Ron and I, we've got to figure out what we're going to do next week, and it will be hopefully exciting.
There you go.
All right.
Thanks, guys.
Talk to you.